us for today's AVST Live webinar. Today we're going to be talking about speech transforming the workplace. I want to draw your attention to a couple of our upcoming webinars just on the screen here. We'll go ahead and include a link to those in case you're interested in signing up when we send you a follow-up email. And in addition, if you've joined us for a webinar before, we occasionally give away an item. Today we're going to be giving away a set of Plantronics headphones. So if you're the lucky winner of those, I will send you an email later today as a thank you for attending. And then Neil Butler is going to be walking us through the presentation today. And before I turn it over to Neil, just want to let you know that we are recording this. And so in addition to the link to upcoming webinars, the link to the slides we will also make available to you. We'll send you a link to the recording as well in case you want to review any of the content. And we also will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, and you're welcome to type your questions in at any time. So we'll have those queued up for Neil. And so with that, I'll let Neil Butler take it away.
Thank you very much, Ann. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Once again, thanks for coming. We know it's hard to carve time out of your valuable day. We always appreciate it. We'll hopefully make it worth your while. And today's topic is a pretty good one to talk about being valuable, because it's certainly a very timely one. And speech transforming the workplace is kind of an interesting concept. Speech in the workplace obviously has been something that's been coming into the workplace for the last 20 years. And one of the great things is we were actually there in the beginning, which means we have kind of an interesting perspective on it. Those of you who might not know who we are, we've been in the UC market for over 30 years. And we've got a couple of areas that we're recognized as the leader in, and certainly a couple of areas that we've been first in market to consistently over the years, and speech applications is one of them. And partially that's because the way this company was created was two other companies were rolled together. One had years of experience in a traditional call processing market, and the other had years of experience in a speech-enabled call processing market. And we combined those companies and those products into a single solution that now is actually the solution that has the most number of users deployed using the speech, as well as the most number of customers, and probably the longest average time with customers as well. And that's what we focus on, our communication solutions that do a couple of things. They increase the productivity of the user. That's probably one of the best things that you can get with the unified communications application. And also they can remove latency in transactions, which makes the customers happy, the callers happy. And we do both those. If you look at how we kind of look at the market as we're trying to decide, what to do with the product in the next rounds, we break it down into three areas. Individual workers, which really would be primarily mobility. The individual workers that just sit at their desk and work in their desk all day, we've been working on that for so long. We're pretty comfortable we have that one nailed down. But those mobile workers, they need a little extra help. So a lot of things in our R&D budgets are about mobility. And of course, speech is a mobility technology. For teams and collaboration, that's a very hot area for most UC companies. And we have some things in that area. And while we don't talk about that in this webinar, we certainly have other webinars about our TeamQ product and some of the things we do. And you can hopefully see invitations to that coming soon. And then the core business application itself, how it sits on the network, interoperability, reliability, scalability, those core pieces are extremely important. And again, we won't talk about that this time through, but we do have other webinars if that's of interest to you. Today we're going to look at the unified communications stack, and particularly the mobility piece where we tend to use the speech access. Speech does a number of things in our product. We're going to look at all of them today. But there's three primary areas where we use speech recognition, and we'll look at all three of those and show you how they interact and sort of how this whole speech enablement, as opposed to being a separate server, what most of our competition does is put a separate server in for speech functionality. We've actually integrated it inside the core application, which makes it much more useful and much more intuitive. We think it's very important for us to be able to take our solutions out into the market, knock on any door, and talk to a customer that has anything in their environment. We don't want to be the company that comes to you and says, look at our really nice solutions. Here's the list of equipment you'll have to replace or upgrade. And we have found that that's actually not necessary. Everything our system does, we can do using the oldest PBX that we integrate to, using any type of email or groupware product, any type of network architecture. We've made our product such that it's truly independent of what else is out there. And that's very important, not only for general interoperability when we start talking to customers, but in terms of the concept of being future-proof, because many of you are looking at this webinar because you have an infrastructure that's in flux. And you're not maybe doing all of it at once, so it'd be nice to know if you look at a unified communication solutions today, that next year, next quarter, whenever you look at the other major pieces of your infrastructure, you'll be comfortable. You can carry whatever it is you buy today forward. And again, that's very important for us, and that's why we do all this work on interoperability. Today, however, in our short time here, we're going to focus on speech recognition, voice. You know, voice is extremely interesting. It's the most powerful tool for communications. We don't think about it very much because we've been talking our whole lives. But if you think about, you know, your average day, you know, all it takes is to get a nice sore throat where you don't want to talk for a day, and all of a sudden you realize not only is it a powerful tool, but it's a tool consistently in use. So what we want to do is extend that power to other types of solutions where you're not necessarily talking to another human being. You know how to talk. You would think it'd be fairly easy to do that, and it is if you get the right product. If you get a product that's been designed and is, you know, maybe in its third or fourth generation, such that it understands how speech really works in an automated environment. Now, we all know this is a technology that people are comfortable with. Most of us are carrying a device that works with speech commands in our pocket, our mobile device, and those are extremely popular agents for deploying speech out into the world. It's actually done wonders for our speech app to have other speech apps out there like Siri, where people get very familiar with what it is. And now they have interesting questions asked, like, well, on Siri, I have this problem. I can do this on Siri. Can you do that? It's a good tool for opening up conversations. I actually had a situation earlier this week where I have a new vehicle that I got, and I was actually, the thing I liked about the new vehicle most was the new electronic station in it, and with the better connectivity and the better Bluetooth and all these new solutions. And I found out I can actually connect to Siri while I'm in my car and do things like read and send text messages. And why that's so important for me is because I've been doing that in my car with email and voice messages with our product for years. I really understand the value of that. It's part of the way I work. And now I've found I can extend it out, not through our product in this case, but still I can extend it out, and that's very valuable to me. And I know what you get from that. You get productivity gains. You get cost savings. Things happen more quickly. If I can listen to an email on my drive into work and reply to it, not just save it for later, but actually process it using speech commands, then when I get to work, that's something that's already been taken off my plate. So lowering the latency, increasing the productivity, that is really where speech comes in. Now, sometimes people aren't comfortable using speech for everything, and we talk to a lot of people who say, no, when somebody calls my company, I still want them to get a human being, and that's fine because there's other ways to use speech, internal deployments only, operational hours extensions, things like that. It's no matter how you want to lay out your company, it's worth looking at speech and what it can give you. Because people now use it, it's far more accepted. When we started putting speech applications in 12, 13 years ago, a little longer than that actually, there was very low acceptance for it. And the reason was, primarily I think, because people had seen movies like 2001 and they just wanted to talk to a computer. They didn't understand what speech was, and they would get very frustrated. And the most typical thing you would hear is somebody would call up and say something to a speech application, like, I'd like to get my messages now, and the speech application isn't programmed to recognize that phrase, so it would say, I'm sorry, and the caller would start talking louder and slower to try and get it to work, and of course that actually makes recognition worse. So in the early years, adoption was low, frustration was high. As the technology's gotten better, those levels of frustration have gone way down. And if you have an application that's been in the market for years, you've tuned the vocabularies to help with that as well. So we are very good, because of the years of experience we have, in putting together a list of speech commands that are going to be both intuitive and self-directed, meaning there won't be as many recognition errors because this command sounds like this other command. And the amount of money that's been put into speech recognition now, partially because of smartphones, partially because of all the web and the large corporate apps that have been using it, have really taken this technology to the point where acceptance is very high. Doesn't mean everybody wants to use it for every function, but it does mean if you decide to deploy it, or even if you just decide to look at it with us and through a demo system, I think you'll find this is no longer a question of whether the technology is ready. It's just a question of whether or not you're ready. We're going to talk about 3 speech applications. Now, almost anybody in our company would tell you we have 2 speech applications, but there's actually a little third one that's kind of important. And this one doesn't become important until after the sale, if you don't understand what it is and how to use it. But we're going to look at Automated Attendant and all the things that it does. We're going to look at the outside caller interface, which is sort of the second half of Automated Attendant, and we'll see what that does. And then we'll spend some time with the user interface, which is the obvious piece where you actually use the speech commands yourself to get into your mailbox. The most success early on came from Speech Automated Attendant. It was the easiest thing to show a good ROI for. You could lower the number of console operators that you had. You could run it after hours. You could run it internally and take some of the load off the console. There were just great tools for showing the financial value of doing it. And from our system's point of view, we have always had a strong focus on call completion, even in the days before speech. So Automated Attendant was a big tool for us to make sure that we could, when a caller called in, we wanted to be able to connect that call right away. We wanted to get that caller to the correct person. And it wasn't just a matter of a simple Automated Attendant to do that. The kind of things we put in our Automated Attendant were incredibly strong scheduling, so that each department could have its own operating hours. We put all the tools that we had in there for giving information, like audio libraries to read back operating hours or directions. We put the corporate directory inside it so people could easily get to the party that they were looking for. Even put fax in it. For years we had very powerful fax libraries. And then of course we made it multilingual. Those systems that have callers, with different languages, you can load up to 5 different languages and have a completely multilingual experience. Now, the thing we've done in the last 10 years is take all of that strength and speech enable it. So whereas 10, 15 years ago, you could have a great Automated Attendant experience limited to what DTMF touchtones could do, we've taken that and completely speech enabled it. Now, completely speech enabled, it sounds just like a phrase that I would use to get my word count up. But the truth is, most other companies haven't completely speech enabled their Automated Attendant. They have a speech directory, so you can say the first and last name of the person you're trying to reach to do a transfer. But then if you want to go to another menu, you have to press a DTMF key. And the problem with this is a lot of our access into these systems is when we're in our car. And if you called into that person, got into the Automated Attendant, put your phone back in your pocket, you're hopefully on speakerphone now, since that's pretty much the law everywhere, and you ask for somebody and it tries them and it comes back and you don't get through, and then you want to do some sort of other operation in the menu, and it says, to get to the operator, press 0. Well, now you have to get your phone back out of your pocket, and there's all these issues. Our belief is speech is a choice. When we offer you speech at the beginning, speech should be complete throughout the entire menu. So we do everything in our menus. We do a complete directory, and all the power of the directory we'll look at in a few slides down. And then we also give you the ability to use all speech, all DTMF, or any mix that you'd like. And what that means is we can build the most comfortable kinds of menus out there for callers. Now, when we started building Automated Attendants, not everybody knew the extension numbers, so there were always directories. And in the early days, we used dial by name. Please enter the first few digits of the person you're trying to reach last name. And Nobody really liked that technology. That was more the company that bought the voicemail trying to, squeeze some extra value out, one less call that would go to the attendant console. But we used it for years. But what we found early on, particularly in our system, where we've consolidated maybe 5 locations for a customer, and they have 2 locations in one city and then a location each in 3 other cities scattered around. They're all using a single CX system, and when the dial by name directory comes up, those companies tend to be large, so they have many people, maybe with the name of John Burke. So when somebody would dial, Burke, B-U-R, they would get all these listings back. And what you really want to get in that kind of environment are localized listings. So one of the things we did right away with speech, and we finally managed to get it in for DTMF as well, is we now have group-based directories. So we now can have a call come into Chicago, and when somebody either spells the name or says the name, it will only look at the people that we want it to look at, which is typically just the people in Chicago. And this is also good for individual buildings on a campus environment, individual departments, anything along those lines. So that was an extremely powerful way to make an ongoing application even more palatable to the customers. We handle time zones. We handle different operators based by where the calls are coming in, different business hours by location or department, and we even within those menus can launch one of our self-service true IVR applications. So extremely powerful tools that are core to the product in the automated attendant, and the speech is integrated in on top of that. So it takes advantages of all the work we've done. When we start looking at connecting any kind of call completion system, the first point, of course, is going to be the interoperability. And the interoperability in the early days was, can we work with your phone system or not? And if we can, great. If we couldn't, well, we probably wouldn't be talking to you. But today, because of the flexibility in terms of architecture and the number of acquisitions that are happening and mergers, we find it very, very necessary to make sure our product works with every phone system on the market and works well, not just put a media gateway on it and you can get some basic functionality. We do support dialogic media gateways. There are great places where we use those, great reasons to use those, but we don't ever want to use a dialogic media gateway because that's the only integration we have. So we maintain our own integrations for over 240 systems. No other company does that. Everyone else makes integrations for the PBX, that they're made, the manufacturer who they're made by, and then they use media gateways of some type for all the other integrations. That gives us more powerful integrations, more reliable integrations, the ability to make them stronger, to take advantage of more features. And that's one of the key things when you start looking at an automated attendant product, is that kind of connectivity is very important. So we have that flexible automatic scheduling, and what we found, and this was an external application for years with us called Schedule Express. A few software versions ago, I think 8.6, we actually moved that functionality into the core product by creating a scheduling mailbox. And now it's much easier to schedule anything you need in the way of things coming into an automated attendant. So 5 departments, they all have different business hours, not going to be a problem. Different DID and DNIS numbers, you want to go to different menus, not going to be a problem. 50 levels of menus, well, it's going to be a problem, but just for the callers. We'll do it fine, but no caller will probably use something like that. But we have all the different pieces that we can use. And once that is in place, we also allow the administrator to have overrides. So, if you have a business in Chicago, you kind of know about snow days. There are days where as the administrator or the manager of a business, you roll over at 4 o'clock in the morning, look out your window, there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, you know you're not going to have a normal work day. With our system, rather than have to get up and go in and fire up your computer and get on your VPN and connect in through your terminal emulation program and do some changes, you can literally pick up your mobile device from your bedside and go into a little web app and change it, or call in and change it using voice commands. And the ability to control that kind of functionality easily just makes the system more powerful when those circumstances arrive. With a speech automated attendant, if you start to look at one, beyond the ability, just the basic feature of you speak the name, it transfers the call, there's a lot of other features you need to look for. You need to look for flexibility in where that user speech directory comes from, and can certain individuals opt out or be opted out by the administrator. You know, your board of directors might have a mailbox on your system. Probably you don't want them in your speech directory. Alias names. I can't tell you how important it is for a good, clean rollout of a speech system to have somebody look at that list of your usernames before you turn it on, because anybody that does this for a living will go down and simply highlight, you know, 5% of the names on that list probably, and say this just isn't going to work because we know what that name sounds like, and it isn't what it's spelled like, and there's going to be recognition errors. So let us in advance build alias names and import them into the system so you get a much more smooth transition, less interruption to business. And disambiguation for the 5 people with the same name. How can we sort those out? By groups, by department, by locations? So you can actually say John Tyler, and it'll come back and say, do you mean John Tyler in operations or John Tyler in accounting, let's say? And the John Tyler portion would be recorded in that person's actual name. We'd use their recorded name for that. So the directory piece is very, very important. And that includes things like we have an API that we can use for directory synchronization to other things. Not everybody wants, you know, a directory that has everyone in it, or a directory that's completely standing on its own. Another issue with this is most people sell the system with subscriber mailboxes being what drive the directory, and most people charge for subscriber mailboxes. So if you have a speech automated attendant function where you have 5,000 people you want to transfer to, but only 500 of them are on your system, it's going to be ridiculously expensive if you have to buy a mailbox for every user. We don't require that. You can actually put as many mailboxes on the system for speech rec as you want, and we actually can use that API to sync them to some external database. Departmental transfers is the same thing. You have to have a unique way to get to anything you want to transfer to. So because we've been doing this for longer than anybody else out there on the market, our product's more feature-rich, more intuitive, and it's integrated into the system. Here's a test question to ask. If one of my subscribers is on the phone in their mailbox listening to messages, and a caller calls in from the outside and says their name, what happens? In 9 systems out of 10, what happens is, because that's probably running on a separate server as a separate application, it will transfer the call to the user anyway, which of course will be busy, which of course will simply forward back to voicemail. On our system, it will generally be set up so that that person on the phone will get a little tone in their ear saying, you have a call from John Tyler. Would you like to accept this call? Or if nothing else, we'll have rules on how to handle those calls based on the status of the user. So experience in the application is something that's very important with this kind of solution. So let's look just really quickly at kind of what this sounds like. I've got a nice simple greeting recorded there, and it's got a few options in it, but basically the process is very, very straightforward. But what you heard is a very simple automated attendant process, but there's a couple of things going on there. I have call screening turned on. That's why I asked the caller their name, which means not only can I tell John Tyler in his ear if he's in our system who he has a call and who it's from, but also if I place a call out to him, when he gets the call, it'll say, you have a call from John Tyler. Please say accept, reject, acknowledge. So many more features than just the blind transfer, and this is what comes from years of doing this in the business. The outside caller interface is the second half of that process, and it's only important for one reason. So what happens here is, if you call in and you say somebody's name and they answer, that's fine. You've completed that call. But if they don't answer, one of two things is going to happen. Most systems, it's simply going to put them into voicemail automatically. Simply going to drop into voicemail and they'll leave a message, and that's frustrating and sometimes not really what you want. The other thing that could happen is that call could come back in to the system and offer that caller other options. And a few of the new systems do that, ours included, of course. The difference is all the other systems, when they do it and they come back in, the options are DTMF driven. Just like I said, an incomplete menu where you need some speech and some DTMF is awkward. This is very awkward. If I called, I'm in my car, I called him on my speakerphone, driving down the road, and now it's going to say, press 1 to leave a message, press 0 for the operator. That's just not a good way to do it. It's much better to keep that outside caller interface in the same format it was when the call started. So this would be the experience on our system.
So Neil, the audio on those is really quiet. I'm guessing it has it's playing over your headset maybe instead of, because it's not coming through on speakers.
Okay, hold on a second.
Is not available. Please say, locate, leave a message, try another person, or operator.
Much better.
All right, thank you. I'll use that switched version of it from now on. And I'm not all that concerned with people hearing what this sounds like. Most people have heard these processes. But it is nice to get a feeling for how simple it is when this is deployed, particularly for the outside caller, because that's the caller that you don't have any control over. The user you do have control over, of course, are your users. And what you offer your users is a user interface, same kind of thing, a speech interface for the user. And the same rules come into force here. If you're offering a user interface that is speech, it really needs to be all speech. It doesn't do you much good if you can do like address a message with speech, but all the commands are DTMF. Or you have to log in using DTMF to get into the mailbox, and then you can start using speech. The goal of the speech user interface is pretty much for my users that are mobile, the ability to have a hands-free, eyes-free experience, to get into their mailbox and do everything the system does and use only speech commands to do it. And that's basically what our system does. Now, we didn't get that in the first pass of this system. Remember, this is a 15-year-old system. It took us years to figure out all the important rules, and we figured them out from you guys, from customers, coming back and saying, well, that's not good. Here's what I need to do. We now have a speech-enabled mailbox that does everything that the DTMF mailbox does, and actually does about 15 to 20% more, because speech is a better tool than DTMF for doing certain kinds of things. So what can I do if I'm a speech user? In my case, I push the button on my Bluetooth phone as I pull out of my driveway in the morning, calls in, and it comes back and it says, hello, Neil Butler, what would you like to do? And I can say, what are my appointments for today? And it'll go read my calendar. I can say, get new messages, and it'll get my new email, voice, and fax messages. It'll play my voice messages, use text-to-speech to read me my email messages, tell me information about any fax messages that I have. I can create a new meeting. If let's say I'm on the phone and Ann calls me and says, are you okay for next Wednesday for another webinar? I can say, sure, that's no problem. Ann hangs up. I'm still connected. We have continuous connection. What would you like to do? Create a new meeting for next Wednesday at 10 o'clock for 1 hour. Who would you like to invite? Ann. Maybe somebody from my contacts, whoever's relevant. So I basically have that triage that I normally do when I get to work that starts in my drive-in. And that just makes this the most powerful tool for increasing productivity for mobile users. You know, if you have a maintenance staff or a sales staff that spends the day driving from appointment to appointment and logs, literally hours in the car, this will be a tool that they will come to love and live by. And all of us here who've had it for a long time, obviously, can certainly give testament to that. All right, so here's just what a session sounds like for this.
What would you like to do?
Get new messages.
One moment, please. You have 3 unread messages. Message number 1, an email message from Mark Reed. Message subject, the Martin Project. Message body, hi John, we need to talk about the Martin Project. Call me as soon as you can.
So if you listen to that, that's using a combination of recorded prompts and text-to-speech. There's certainly no problem understanding it. Text-to-speech has come a long, long way over the years. And what you're seeing or listening to is an experience that makes it perfectly reasonable to handle your messages over the phone. Is that what you'd do when you'd come into work, pick up your phone and call in and do this? No, of course not. You have better tools when you're sitting at a desk, using your speakerphone, using your email to get to your messages, those sort of things. Much better. But if you compare this to driving down the car with your mobile device balanced on one knee, trying to get to messages, this is a much better alternative. And this piece of getting in and getting to your messages is where this started for us. And then, of course, we've expanded it over the years quite a bit. One of the other pieces we've done, and I've referred to this a little bit, is we've taken that same user interface and added call management and call control to it. So if you were logged into your mailbox, reading away, reading to your messages, whatever you're doing, or if somebody calls and your phone rings and you answer, this would be the experience of answering a call.
You have a call from Mark Reed. Please say accept call, reject call, acknowledge, transfer call, or review call.
Acknowledge.
Please record a brief acknowledgement.
Hi, Mark. I'm in a meeting and we'll call you back when I get out in about an hour. Now, that's a lot of things there. That's a great speech interface and a great set of solutions with options for handling calls that you won't find on any other system. And the ability, if you look at that list, accept call is pretty obvious. If I say accept call, it'll connect me to the caller. If I say reject call, they go to voicemail. If I say acknowledge, that's what this slide is showing, I can actually record a personal acknowledgement message that's played to the caller. I haven't committed to take the call. As soon as that's over, I'm going back to whatever I was doing. There are definitely times when you'd like to let that caller know what's going on. Maybe they're an important customer or something like this. You can give a callback expectation, but you don't really want to take that call right now. Maybe you're just getting ready to walk into a meeting or something along those lines. Or you hear that caller, you and one other person are working on this particular incident. You can say transfer call, and you can transfer it to another system user, still not committing to take the call. Or maybe you answered walking down the hall towards your desk, and what you'd like to do is transfer that call to your desktop phone. So you can transfer it to any other device as well. So the ability to screen incoming calls and actually have useful call choices is something that's unique on our system. And even more unique is if you were in a meeting and this happened, you really can't afford to take calls, our mobile device does this same thing silently. It pops up a little window saying you have a call from Mark Reed, hit one of these buttons, accept call, reject call, acknowledge. And if you hit acknowledge, there's another screen you can go to that's silent acknowledge, where you hit a button and it automatically says, Neil Butler was unable to take this call and we'll call you back in. And then depending on what button you hit, it would say 1 hour, 15 minutes, whatever it is. So great tools for managing incoming calls. Most of this functionality also works with a DTMF user interface, but you get some extra stuff with the speech because there's things you can do with speech that just would be too difficult to do using DTMF commands. I talk about calendar access. This is pretty straightforward. Some people, almost all of us, read our calendars every day if we're mobile using this. Some people also make a lot of their appointments using this. I don't happen to make a lot of appointments using this, but I definitely read my calendar almost every morning.
What would you like to do?
Get my appointments for today.
One moment, please. You have one appointment on Tuesday, July 9th. Appointment number 1 is a meeting scheduled by Alan Thomas starting on Tuesday, July 9th at 2 p.m. for 30 minutes. Subject: software update discussion.
So if I had a list of 3 or 4 new appointments, you would simply go through that list and let me listen to what's going on. And as I said before, I can also use commands to set new appointments. One of the things that happens in the background when you have a personal assistant license, a lot of this function that we're talking about is driven off that license, is it's very easy to make all this functionality work with the users on your system. I know who's on your system. I know their phone numbers. I know their email address. There's a system, phone book. So that's very easy. And it's very handy to do that. But what's nicer is the fact that we can extend the range of those applications out to anyone in your contacts. So we can actually sync with your contacts such that your Outlook contacts, your Notes contacts, Gmail, whatever you have, are now part of your directory. So this command here is really not what you do most times. If you think about it, why would you want that information? Because you want to call them or something else. You would simply go do that. But where this becomes handy is the fact that if I'm listening to a message and it's from one of my field people saying that the problem is there's a power issue out at this particular location, and I have I'm dealing with the person out there on site, the customer, I can say forward this message, record a brief introduction. Listen, Mr. Smith, here's the information about what we found. We put the power monitor on, and you definitely have AC power fluctuations. We need to talk about that. Who do you want to send this to? John Smith. He's in my contacts. What he gets is an email with a WAV file attachment. I can send new messages. I can forward existing messages. I can add them to calendar requests. And probably most helpful of all, I can call them. If I pick up my phone and say, call John Tyler, when I'm logged into my system, it says business, mobile, or home, or lists whatever numbers I have in my contacts form. I say mobile, it says one moment please, and it connects me to that person. That just makes these tools so much more useful, particularly when you're using them in a place where you don't really have easy access to your hands. So the contacts access piece is a very important piece. Now, it's very easy to sort of just talk about the pieces. Here's what we do. Here's all the wonderful things the product does. Let's take a look at what a customer did with it and look at why they chose to use this product. We have lots and lots of customers. I don't even know what the number is anymore, but it's very high. And a lot of them use speech. So we kind of go through when we look at these kind of reference accounts at ones that are a little unusual, a little different, ones that had kind of a need that you don't see everywhere. And Navy Pier in Chicago is one of those customers. Navy Pier is a customer who's overseeing businesses. They're not all that large, but they have all these businesses they're looking over and they're involved with, such that their needs are those of a very large company. They get a lot of calls. They have a lot of things they're scheduling, a lot of businesses they're monitoring, and a lot of people running up and down the pier, a lot of mobile people that they need to be able to keep in touch with. So one of our vendors went out, met with the customer, did the needs survey, and figured out what their needs were, started talking to them. They had an older infrastructure, so what they were going to do is update that, and they had decided to go to the Avaya IP infrastructure on the telephony side. They had just a huge amount of incoming calls. I can't remember how many console operators they had. But if you think about it, any of the 100 businesses or so that are at that pier, they serve as the front end to that. So they just had a very, very large speech automated attendant requirement. And they had people out and about in all those locations. So they needed what we call intelligent call routing, ways to route different calls based on where different users are. Excuse me. And of course, they needed secure access to voice messages. Security is one of their concerns because almost every message they have concerns one of their users on the pier, and that has to be treated as proprietary information. And at the same time, they were moving from Exchange to Office 365. So you kind of look at that sidebar shows you a very simplified view of how they use the speech automated attendant, the kind of information that they're able to do. And if you realize every call that comes in here and gets handled is 30 seconds to a minute of a console operator's time, and they were able to reduce their console total considerably. They didn't have to do this with speech. You could have done it with DTMF, but it just doesn't. It's not very friendly. When you have to go into a menu and look things up, people will tend to hit that operator button pretty quickly. So by having a speech-enabled functionality that let them do all those directory lookups and let their workforce be speech-enabled, they saw the value of putting speech on the system. And the whole cost and productivity piece was pretty easy to do with them. Very interesting case study, and I think we have an article that's published on this as well that you could look at. But nothing they have is unique. Everyone has the same issues. Everyone has lots of calls coming in. Everyone has mobile employees. It's just a matter of how you're going to deploy that. Now, when we run these webinars, a large number of attendees are existing customers who are looking to find out more information about their system. So I always sort of end this webinar by letting people know, if you are a CXC customer already, the platform that delivers speech is the one you already have. Some of the functionality we've talked about, like automated attendant, is in your system. All those menus and everything else I talked about, that's a standard part of your system. And if you're at 8.6 or higher, it includes that scheduling module that makes that flexibility much easier to maintain. Speech is not a new server. It's not a lot of hardware. It's simply a matter of turning some licensing on the system you have. There is a cost for it, but it isn't very intrusive in the environment, and it isn't really very expensive compared to what it delivers. And once you put speech licenses on the system, that license, that pool of common licenses, works for everything. So if you're looking at speech as an alternative, the few things that I think always come to the top of the stack for me is make sure it's integrated to your other solutions. So if you're talking about an automated attendant, a speech automated attendant, and you have a voicemail with a user interface, those should all be together. Those shouldn't be separate. Even if you get them from the same vendor, most times there's a speech server. Just like there's a mobile device server and things like that. That really dilutes the capability of delivering the really high value pieces that you do with an integrated system. Secondly, look at what it does. You know, step through the process and see, can you do all the functions beginning to end without ever having to push a button? Because that's what your callers want. They don't really want to switch back and forth. And secondly, how long has that system been on the market? And that's not just stability with speech, that's how well the grammars have been built. You know, how good is it at nailing recognition where it doesn't have parallel recognition instances because the commands are too similar. So those are the kind of things that you really want to look at with a speech platform. And we, of course, are happy to talk to you if you're looking in that direction and set something up where we can talk about exactly what you're looking for and how we might be of help. And I believe now we're ready for some questions.
We do have some questions already ready to go, and just as a reminder, if you would like to submit a question and you haven't done that already, you can use the orange arrow in the upper right corner to expand the webinar options, and you should see the question box toward the bottom. Neil, these first couple questions came in toward the beginning, I think, when we were still talking about auto attendant. Can the caller speak in English or Spanish?
So it's kind of counterintuitive the way speech recognition works. But, you know, I told you that the grammars are important. So having things that really can only mean one thing are important. When you try and do multiple languages at the same time, you run into those kind of conflicts very early on. So we do multilingual, but the way we do it is when you get into a menu, we will, let's say the announcement is in English. At the end, it will say something like, for this application in Spanish, press 1, or say Espanol, say Spanish, something along those lines. What we will then do is, for that call, we'll move and use the Spanish recognition engine. And that will give you those same really high 90s recognition levels. Now let me make this clear though. That is when you are wanting to change language, not when you're changing the origin of your speaker. In other words, people ask me all the time, they say, I'd like to deploy this, but a large percentage of the people that call into my system are English as a second language people. So they have accents. And how well will that work? Well, what Nuance does, we use the Nuance speech recognition engine, and what Nuance does, when they build the engine and test it, they get thousands of users of all ethnic varieties. So not only a lot of English speakers, but a lot of English speakers from the north, from the south, from the east, to get the regional dialects to make sure that works. And then they get English as a second language speakers. So perhaps some Spanish Americans who speak Spanish as their primary language, and English is their secondary language. Maybe some Japanese people that do the same, some people from Germany, and they run all that. And the goal is to deliver a system where if you can easily understand the caller, the system should be able to as well. And I think you understand what I mean. You've had conversations with people whose English is so accented that you have to ask them to repeat half of what they say. You know, I always feel that's my problem because, you know, they at least know more than one language and I only know one, but you know who that is. However, if you have people who they're even heavily accented, but you have no problem understanding them, most likely the system won't either. So multilingual is required when you want them to talk in that other language. Just, you know, some common sense is required when you simply want English as a second language speakers to use the system.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Another question, similar topic. Will we ever be able to speak in multiple languages on a single call processor?
Probably. The technology of speech recognition is still a very hot area, and there's improvements all the time, and we probably will eventually get to that. I would expect what you'll see is a place like, let's say when you get on the phone to an airline company. Today, they do the same thing. If you've had that experience, they ask you if you want to, you know, what language you want to use. They move you to a different recognition engine. When you see them not doing that, that means the technology has figured out how to do it, but only when it's deployed on big giant mainframe computers. But that means it's on its way to move down to server-based. But until you really see that in those kind of industries, I'd say it's unlikely you'll see it down on a server-based deployment like what we're offering.
Thanks, Neil. Next question. How does one go about training end users how to use speech? This seems to be a barrier.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that if I'm involved with a customer, there's a few things I want them to know. First thing is a lot of people use speech on their computers, and they have, like, I use it. I dictate a lot of documents, and I do the draft of the documents using Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a speech recognition engine that runs on my computer. I put a headset in, I sit there and I dictate, and it writes it for me. And it's in high 90s, 96, 97% accurate, but it wasn't when I installed it. When I installed it, it was 60% accurate probably. And the day you install it, they have you read 5 or 6 paragraphs to it. And then over the time you're using it, it's analyzing what you're saying. And when you get in and correct the word, it looks back and said, oh, that's how he said that word. And so it's what we call speaker-dependent speech recognition. It learns how you speak. And we don't use speaker-dependent. We have to use speaker-independent. So what we need to do is make those grammars I talked about as accurate as possible. That's our job. What you have to do as a customer is teach your people what's really going on and some very common things. Now, when I do this talk, like in a conference room with a bunch of people, at this point I always stop and say, you hear the air conditioners? Now, most of you right now probably can hear an air conditioner in the background where you are, but you weren't aware of it before because you tuned it out. This technology doesn't do a very good job of tuning things out. So the first thing you have to understand is for this to work well, you have to analyze the environment you're in. I used to have a convertible and never could use our product because even at 45 miles an hour with the convertible and the top down and a microphone, you know, on my phone, yeah, you just couldn't use that. You can't have that kind of background noise. So a little bit of education on what's going on with the command so they understand they're not having a conversation, they're issuing a speech command. Has to be in the right format. Nice little kind of a user's guide that has the common formats, and then an explanation of things like how speakerphones work when they switch. And you know, there's some of the technology that can be done in about a half hour that will greatly improve their experience with it. And that's kind of the best you can do.
I will add to that just as an example. I'm quite certain we have our voice user interface. It's a one-page PDF that's available on our website. So we can certainly make that available to whoever is interested in that that's here on the webinar. And
I'm actually very happy to say it's now a 2-page PDF.
Oh,
because over the years,
sorry about that.
We've been adding commands over the years and making that font smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, we gave up that ghost and moved it to 2 pages. And now it's readable for older gentlemen like myself.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Next question. Will there be a test mechanism to test the phonetic spelling?
In some areas there are, yes, when you do alias names and some things like that. And there are also diagnostic tools where if you're constantly getting errors with certain names or things like that, the process for this is in our application, we say, who do you want to talk to? And the person says, John Smedini, or whatever they say. We record that audio. We take that audio and the grammar number. So what should we recognize at this point in the application? And that's grammar 21, let's say. We submit that to the nuance engine. Nuance says, well, here's all the things that are valid in grammar 21. Let us look at this WAV file and analyze it. Okay, our best guess is this is whatever, and it returns that value. It also returns some information to us in terms of diagnostic information, and it saves that utterance, that word, and an XML file describing why they made the choices they did. And we have tools that let you go get that information. So yes, there's a little bit of help tuning it up front where you can actually test it, but probably more important in the long run, there are tools to help you find those errors, those persistent errors. If you use one of our vendors or our own professional services people, and they look at your user list, the name of your users, they'll be very, very accurate in terms of getting all the aliases in up front, just because they have that experience doing it.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Looks like this might be the last question. I'll call it the last one unless anyone's still typing. So this one looks like it's one of our existing customers. He says, right now, callers dial into the main number, and if operators are on duty, they don't have the option to use speech. Is it possible to present them with a menu that allows them to speak into the system, and if they need help, to press 0 to speak to an operator?
Yes. In fact, in the 30 years I've been in call processing, the one rule that has been the paramount #1 rule is you always give them the chance to escape out to a live human being. So it's every menu we have is capable of doing that. And you'd simply record, welcome to my company. Please say the first and last name of the party you're trying to reach, or say operator to reach an operator at any time. And then that would transform right out to the operator queue.
Okay. Thanks again, Neil, and thanks everyone for joining today. As I mentioned earlier, we'll send a follow-up email later today with a link to the slides, a link to the recording, as well as a couple of the resources that were mentioned. I'll go ahead and include the case study, Navy Pier case study that Neil mentioned, and I think there's an article as well with more details, and a link to our upcoming webinar schedule in case you'd like to join us again on another one coming up. And again, we appreciate everyone taking the time, and I'll let Neil close us up as well.
Thank you, Ann, and I'd just like to echo that same sentiment. We do appreciate you coming to these. Hopefully you find them helpful, and we really would like you to tell us. We don't really need you to tell us if you found it really good. That's all right. But if there's something else you'd like to cover, or you thought that it was too short or it was too long, you can use info@avst.com to get that information to us.
Have a great day, everyone.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.